Have you ever wondered why some of the boldest animated films of the 60s vanished from public memory? In an age when cartoons were meant for children, a few creators dared to defy that rule. They blended surreal art with dangerous ideas and ended up banned, forgotten, or buried. Tonight we uncover 14 banned animated movies of the 60s that were far too ahead of their time. Number 14. Yellow Submarine, 1968. It looked harmless, a Beatles cartoon full of color and joy. But Yellow Submarine was a psychedelic rebellion wrapped in music and nonsense. Directed by George Dunning, it told the story of the Fab Four journeying through Pepperland to defeat the Blue Meanies with love and sound. Behind its groovy art style, however, was something deeply subversive. The film's swirling visuals were inspired by experimental artists and underground animation. It carried messages of peace, individuality, and rebellion against oppression. Some governments did not see it as fun. They saw propaganda. In several conservative countries, the film was banned outright for promoting psychedelic culture and anti-authoritarian ideas. Critics in its early run were split. Some called it a pop art masterpiece, others saw it as dangerous influence on youth. Rumors spread that the animation concealed hypnotic patterns. There were even accusations that it inspired student protests. When censorship boards intervened, the Beatles themselves distanced slightly from its production, calling it imaginative but strange. Yet over the years, Yellow Submarine became a cult treasure. Its banned status only magnified its legend. Its legacy? A bright dream of peace rising from an era of chaos. A reminder that even a cartoon about a submarine can terrify those afraid of free minds. Number 13. Belladonna of Sadness, 1969. Few animated films from the 60s dared to explore darkness like Belladonna of Sadness. Directed by Eiichi Yamamoto, it emerged from Japan's Mushi production, the same studio that revolutionized anime. But this was no cheerful fairy tale. It was a tragic fever dream told through haunting watercolor imagery and slow-motion surrealism. The story followed a peasant woman wronged by power who sought mystical vengeance. The movie's artwork flowed like living paintings. Each frame looked hand-painted from the soul. But its bold depiction of corruption, religion, and human cruelty was too much for Japanese censors. The film was banned across multiple regions, labeled as obscene and dangerous for society. The censorship tore the studio apart. Investors fled, and director Osamu Tezuka's studio nearly collapsed financially. For decades, Belladonna of Sadness disappeared completely. Bootleg copies circulated in underground art houses, whispered about as forbidden animation. When it resurfaced in restored form during the 21st century, critics called it one of the most visually radical animated films ever made. It influenced artists, filmmakers, and even musicians who saw it as the lost link between medieval art and psychedelic expressionism. Its legacy is a ghostly echo, proof that even animation can speak louder than protest when it dares to show the truth behind beauty. Number 12. The Magic Bird, 1962. At first glance, The Magic Bird was just another Eastern European fairy tale. Produced in Czechoslovakia, it told the story of a young boy and a mythical creature who brings hope to a repressed village. But the regime saw something far more dangerous hidden in its wings. Underneath its folk music and soft animation lay a coded message about political freedom and resistance. The bird symbolized forbidden ideas. Government censors quickly recognized the allegory and shut down the release. Copies were seized and destroyed. The director, Jan Hruby, was interrogated and banned from working in film for years. Yet the film refused to die. Animators smuggled prints into France where it was screened secretly to intellectual circles. Western critics hailed it as poetic rebellion disguised as myth. The animation style used watercolor backgrounds and rotoscoped characters, giving it a dreamlike melancholy unlike anything Disney or Warner could imagine. For decades it was considered lost until a single surviving reel appeared in a private archive in the late 90s. Restored and shown at animation festivals, it stunned audiences with its emotional power and historical weight. The Magic Bird stands today as a forgotten masterpiece, born under censorship fire. Its message still burns bright. Hope cannot be banned. Imagination always finds a way to fly. Number 11. The Tale of the Fox, 1961. It was one of the earliest stop-motion films to be revived in the 60s, and yet it was silenced almost immediately. Originally made in France decades earlier, The Tale of the Fox was re-released with new sound effects and narration during the early 60s in an attempt to reintroduce its chaotic world of talking animals and political satire. But what seemed like harmless folklore became a problem for censors. The story centered on Reynard the cunning fox who outsmarts kings, bishops, and nobles with trickery. It mocked authority in every frame, using animals as stand-ins for corrupt rulers and greedy officials. When political tension rose in Europe, the film's clever subtext was deemed dangerous. Countries under authoritarian rule banned it, claiming it disrespected moral order and encouraged rebellion among youth. Behind the scenes, animators struggled to preserve the film reels from destruction. Government inspectors ordered prints to be melted down. Only one copy survived, hidden in a cellar by a projectionist who refused to let history burn. When rediscovered in the late 90s, restoration experts called it a miracle of animation. Its movements and puppetry rivaled modern techniques decades before their time. The Tale of the Fox became a symbol of artistic defiance. It taught that even the smallest animal could challenge the crown. Number 10. The Fabulous World of Jules Verne, 1960. At a glance, it was a celebration of science and adventure, but The Fabulous World of Jules Verne from Czech visionary Karel Zeman became a political lightning rod. Zeman's style mixed live action and animation into a seamless dream inspired by 19th century engravings. His story followed an inventor kidnapped by pirates who sought to use his new weapon for conquest. Censors immediately saw the danger. The film's message against technological greed mirrored Cold War fears. It was banned in multiple territories accused of spreading anti-militarist propaganda. In Eastern Europe, it was suppressed for implying that invention and power could corrupt any government. In some Western countries, the imagery of airships and submarine warfare was considered too frightening for children. Zeman's production crew faced interrogation and funding withdrawal. Yet he refused to censor his vision. The film slipped into the underground circuit, screened secretly in universities. Western critics like Raymond Durgnat later hailed it as the most original fusion of art and science in animation history. Its legacy survived through whispers and bootlegs. Today, its style influences directors like Terry Gilliam and Wes Anderson. Zeman's mechanical fantasies still remind us that imagination can be both wondrous and politically dangerous. Number 9. The Adventures of Prince Ahmed, 1965. Rishu. Though originally made in the 20s, its 60s restoration became controversial enough to face bans once again. Lotte Reiniger's silhouette masterpiece was revived in 1965 across Europe and America, where audiences rediscovered its Arabian fairy tale told entirely through delicate cutout figures. But the world had changed, and so had the fear of cultural sensitivity and symbolism. When a restored print was released, certain countries accused it of portraying mystical imagery that contradicted moral guidelines. Others saw its sensual dance sequences as improper, even though they were mere shadows on a screen. Religious boards demanded cuts. Some broadcasters refused to air it at all, claiming it contained hidden spiritual messages. Reiniger's legacy was nearly erased again. Distributors withdrew the film, and the revival tour ended abruptly, but animation scholars preserved the surviving reels. Decades later, critics praised it as one of the first feminist triumphs in animation, with Reiniger's work influencing everything from Disney's Fantasia to modern experimental art. Behind its soft silhouettes lay the heart of rebellion. A woman in the early 20th century had created a world of movement that defied convention. Even when censored, her art endured. Prince Ahmed continues to cast its delicate shadows across time, whispering that beauty never obeys the rules of fear. Number 8. The Man Who Planted Trees, 1969. It was a film about hope disguised as a quiet meditation on nature. The Man Who Planted Trees told the story of a humble shepherd who spent his life restoring a barren valley by planting acorns one by one. Directed by French animator Frédéric Bac, it was a masterpiece of poetic restraint, but despite its beauty and peaceful tone, it became one of the most politically censored animated films of its time. Censors feared the film's deeper meaning. To them, the lonely shepherd represented rebellion against industrial greed. His act of creation stood as a challenge to governments destroying forests for profit. When the film was first screened in Canada and Europe, It moved audiences to tears, but certain political groups denounced it as environmental propaganda. Television networks in multiple countries refused to air it, claiming it was anti-development and anti-progress. The backlash stunned back. He had poured his heart into every painted frame using hundreds of watercolor layers that shimmered with emotion. Production was nearly shut down when funding was pulled under political pressure. Yet the animators continued in secret, completing the film against all odds. When The Man Who Planted Trees resurfaced years later, it was hailed as a timeless fable of resilience. Its message that one person's quiet effort can heal the world became universal truth. What once was banned now stands as a symbol of hope for every artist who dares to plant an idea in barren soil. Number 7. The Little Island, 1961. British animator Richard Williams, who would later win fame for Who Framed Roger Rabbit, began his journey with The Little Island, a surreal animated short unlike anything the world had seen. There was no dialogue, only images and sound, forming a philosophical battle between three figures representing truth, beauty, and goodness. What began as an artistic experiment turned into a censorship nightmare. The abstract imagery challenged moral authority and religion. Critics called it blasphemous. The British Board of Film Censors delayed its release, claiming audiences would not understand its message. In some regions, the film was outright banned for mocking the moral foundations of society. Even universities hesitated to show it, fearing public outrage. Williams painted each sequence by hand-blending geometric movement and psychological tension. The film's hypnotic pace and haunting music were too modern for its time. The BBC rejected it. Religious groups condemned it, yet those who saw it privately called it spiritual truth through art. Over time, The Little Island became the foundation of independent animation in the UK. It proved that animation could explore the human soul without words. Though suppressed at release, its legacy grew quietly, inspiring animators to move beyond children's tales into realms of philosophy and emotional chaos. Its message still echoes today. Art that questions. Belief will always be the first thing fear tries to silence. Number 6. The Snow Queen, 1967. American dub version, originally produced in the Soviet Union in 1957. The Snow Queen was hailed in Russia as a masterpiece of morality and artistry. But when it crossed into Western markets a decade later, under a new English dub, it became tangled in Cold War paranoia. The story of Gerda's epic journey to rescue her friend Kay from the Icy Queen seemed innocent enough. Yet American distributors found themselves at the center of controversy. Conservative groups accused the film of smuggling communist ideals under the guise of children's fantasy. They pointed to its themes of loyalty, community, and self-sacrifice as covert political messages. Some theaters refused to screen it. Others faced protests. Television syndication attempts were blocked. In a bizarre twist, the film's kindness was treated as subversion. Behind the scenes, American producers recut sections, removed dialogue, and altered musical cues to make it appear less foreign. But the more they altered it, the stranger it became. Audiences in test screenings called it hauntingly beautiful, but also unsettling. The controversy forced distributors to shelve the film for years. When later generations rediscovered the uncut version, critics realized what had been lost. The Snow Queen was no propaganda piece. It was a delicate, emotional epic that influenced storytellers like Hayao Miyazaki, who cited it as one of his earliest inspirations. Its banning in the West now reads as irony. A story about a girl's compassion was once feared as dangerous. Yet that fear only confirmed the power of its warmth in a frozen world. Number 5. 1001 Nights, 1969. In the final year of the 60s, Japan released a film that would redefine adult animation and simultaneously shatter the tolerance of its censors. 1001 Nights, directed by Osamu Tezuka and Eiichi Yamamoto, was the first of Tezuka's Animorama trilogy. It presented a kaleidoscopic retelling of the ancient Middle Eastern fables, with surreal art styles, wild humor, and dreamlike symbolism. But it was quickly labeled forbidden across much of Asia and parts of Europe. The story followed Alden, a young wanderer who stumbled upon adventure, temptation, and chaos. Through his eyes, Tezuka crafted a universe filled with exaggerated colors and motion that mirrored the era's psychedelic revolution. It wasn't just entertainment, it was rebellion through animation. Censors, however, were horrified. The film was accused of moral corruption and promoting dangerous fantasy. Religious groups protested its reinterpretation of sacred myths. The Japanese Film Board restricted screenings to adult audiences, and foreign distributors faced outright bans. Behind the scenes, Tezuka's studio faced bankruptcy. Many animators quit fearing blacklisting. The film's limited release abroad made it an underground legend in the West, where critics later praised it as the animated 2001 A Space Odyssey of the East. For decades, 1001 Nights existed only as rumor passed among collectors. When finally restored in the early 2000s, its intricate imagery stunned modern audiences. Its blend of Art Nouveau and psychedelic geometry predicted the visual language of later animation icons. Its legacy is one of misunderstood brilliance. What was once banned for daring to dream beyond the boundaries of tradition now stands as proof that animation can be both poetic and provocative at once. Number 4. Alice, 1968. Few animated films captured the unsettling mood of the late 60s, quite like Alice, directed by Czech surrealist Jan Svankmajer. His adaptation of Lewis Carroll's Alice's Adventures in Wonderland was not a cheerful trip down the rabbit hole. It was a nightmare stitched together from broken toys, clock gears, and haunting sound design. Though the film was celebrated by critics for its artistry, it was swiftly banned across several countries. In this version of Wonderland, the whimsy was replaced by dread. Stuffed animals twitched with jerky motion, and the white rabbit was a taxidermied creature that leaked sawdust. Svankmajer used stop motion to transform childhood imagination into existential horror. Communist censors in Czechoslovakia considered it an attack on political control. Western boards thought it was too disturbing for family audiences. The result was the same in both cases. It vanished from theaters. Production was hellish. Funding was cut mid-project, and the director was watched by government officials who suspected hidden political messages. Every prop was handmade from discarded objects and decaying materials, a metaphor for the corruption of innocence. Decades later, Alice was restored and released internationally. Critics hailed it as one of the most unique interpretations of Carroll's work ever created. Modern animators from Tim Burton to Guillermo del Toro have cited it as an influence. Its banning preserved its mystery. In silence, it grew in legend until audiences finally understood its message. Childhood dreams can become nightmares when imagination is chained by authority. Alice remains a cinematic riddle that dares you to look behind the curtain of fantasy and confront what lurks there. Number 3. The Man Who Had His Hair Cut Short, 1966. Belgian animator and filmmaker André Delvaux created something so emotionally raw and psychologically intense that audiences could not decide whether it was animation, live action, or dream. The Man Who Had His Hair Cut Short blurred every boundary of film. Though primarily live action, it incorporated experimental animated sequences to visualize the mind of a man descending into obsession and despair. For that reason, it faced bans and censorship in both Belgium and France. The story followed a mild-mannered teacher who developed a quiet fixation on one of his students and tried to suppress it by cutting his hair short, moving away, and starting anew. But his thoughts twisted into surreal visions, represented through animated expressionism. These sequences disturbed censors who claimed the film blurred morality and mental illness in ways too unsettling for public screening. Delvaux defended his film as a psychological study of loneliness, not a scandalous story. But the authorities were unmoved. The animated hallucinations were deemed offensive and immoral. Screenings were halted, festivals withdrew invitations, and its European distribution collapsed. For decades, the film became a phantom existing only in censored prints. It was not until the late 80s that film historians restored its full version, revealing its haunting poetic balance between animation and reality. Modern critics now praise it as a cornerstone of European surrealism that influenced filmmakers like Lars von Trier and David Lynch. Its legacy is tragic, yet triumphant. By daring to animate the mind itself, Delvaux proved that dreams could be more dangerous than reality. The ban that tried to erase it only gave it more power. Today, it stands as an emblem of the 60s forgotten art house rebellion. Number 2. Fantastic Planet, 1973. Banned in late 60s production stage. Before its official release in the early 70s, René Laloux's Fantastic Planet was already infamous during its late 60s production. Work began in 1967 when the collaboration between French animator René Laloux and Czech artist Roland Topor took shape behind the Iron Curtain. The film's haunting visual world of pastel deserts, floating cities, and giant blue humanoids known as drags was unlike anything before it. But that strangeness became its death sentence for nearly half a decade. Censors in Czechoslovakia and France panicked. The drags symbolized authoritarian rulers who controlled smaller humans called hommes. The allegory was obvious and dangerous. Czech authorities halted production midway through 1968 after the Soviet invasion. They claimed it was politically inflammatory, anti-establishment, and psychologically corrupting for youth. French partners withdrew funding, fearing diplomatic retaliation. Animators worked in secret to preserve what remained of the footage. They hid sketches and negatives in basements during raids. Some were destroyed by police, others smuggled across borders. When the film finally resurfaced years later, it became a sensation, winning the Grand Prix at Cannes in 1973. But many still remember how it had been considered too dangerous to exist only a few years earlier. Behind the scenes, the tension nearly destroyed Laloux's small team. Power shortages and surveillance turned their studio into a prison. Yet out of that fear came one of the greatest anti-authoritarian works in animation history. Fantastic Planet's legacy endures because it embodies rebellion through art. Its landscapes feel alien, but its message is painfully human. It warns that when imagination is policed, humanity loses its voice. What was once banned for being too visionary now defines visionary itself. Number 1. The Glass Harmonica, 1968. No film on this list was more feared by its government than the Glass Harmonica. Created by Soviet director Andrei Kurzhanovsky, it was the only animated film ever officially banned by the USSR for nearly 20 years. Its crime was simple. It encouraged free thinking. The short film unfolded like a surreal dream. Citizens of a gray dystopian city wandered in silence, while an artist played a magical glass instrument that filled the world with color and imagination. The more he played, the freer the people became. But the state's leaders, symbolized as grotesque faces wearing crowns, crushed the harmony and silenced him forever. Soviet officials saw it as a direct attack on totalitarian control. Within weeks of its completion, every print was confiscated and locked in government archives. The director was interrogated and nearly expelled from the film union. Foreign critics never even knew it existed until whispers began spreading through underground art circles in Moscow. Behind the scenes, animators risked their careers to smuggle out a single reel for safekeeping. For years, it was screened privately in hidden apartments by candlelight, a forbidden experience shared among artists. Those who saw it described feeling shaken and inspired, as if they had glimpsed truth itself beneath a layer of animation. When the Glass Harmonica was finally unbanned during the Gorbachev era, it was restored and revealed to the world as a lost masterpiece. Its eerie music, surreal imagery, and political courage shocked modern audiences, who realized how close the film came to disappearing forever. Its legacy is monumental. It stands as a warning from the past that imagination is the first thing dictators fear. The Glass Harmonica didn't just challenge power. It reminded humanity that art is a form of freedom no authority can silence forever. These 14 banned animated movies from the 60s prove that animation is not merely entertainment. It is protest, imagination, and rebellion disguised in color and sound. Each of these films broke the rules that tried to cage them. Which one do you think deserves a full revival today? Like, share, and subscribe, because forgotten art deserves new light.